Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my third episode in this series of the top 25 best prog albums of all time. Today we're going to be talking about albums 15 to 11, so we're getting down into the nitty gritty, just barely missing the top 10 list. If you want to go back and catch the first two shows, I would recommend it if you haven't seen those yet, where I cover in the first episode items number 25 to 21, also some honorable mentions that didn't quite make the cut. And then in the second episode, I talk about, of course, albums 20 through 16, which was a lot of fun. So, and I'm doing this in a unique sort of way. I'll try to keep this brief because I do this preamble before every episode. But I took the Prog Archives list, which is a great database for all things prog and allows people to give ratings and reviews to all of the prog albums throughout history. And they have a list of the top 100 all-time prog albums based on user ratings. And so I've taken that list and I've come down with the pool of 25 albums based upon their top 25, but filtered just one album per artist. So I'm only covering one album per artist. I'll be mentioning some of the other albums that are on Prog Archives list as I go through, but I thought that would be more interesting to create a more diverse list of artists and genres. And then I ranked it according to my own preference, giving a little bit of weight depending on the importance of the album to the genre. So that's basically how I've come down to what I'm doing here. And as I mentioned in the last episode, I know some people quibble with, is this really prog or not prog? Some of the genres kind of blend, and some people like, oh, that's more jazz fusion. I wouldn't put that in a prog list. But for me, I think what's fun about these episodes is that you get a little smattering of a lot of different subgenres within prog, and you could consider it the top 25 prog albums or the top 25 albums that just prog fans really love. I think that's a great way to frame it if you quibble with certain albums being considered prog or not prog. But I think everything on today's list is very clearly in the prog category, so there shouldn't be too many quibbles with me categorizing any of these albums as progressive rock. Maybe one progressive metal choice. And it's funny, a lot of the more modern progressive rock albums are on this list today. So this is kind of my modern prog themed episode. For some reason, they all kind of group together here. Mainly because I wanted to keep the top 10 pretty pure classic 70s prog for the most part. And so all these just barely kind of missed out into getting into that top 10. But I have a big passion for modern progressive rock. If you watch my channel, you should know that. Subscribe if you haven't yet, if you're just stumbling upon this as a prog fan. If you're interested in new albums in progressive rock and trying to discover some of the hidden gems in the current genre, this is a great resource for you. That's what I try to bring to the table. I'm trying to let people know that great progressive rock still exists today. It didn't all die in the late 70s. We've still got a vibrant scene. And if you find the cool hidden gems, I think it's just as good as the classic records of the 70s. There's just so much great stuff coming out now that I want to highlight and let you know about. So that's kind of what's the focus of today's list is, with one exception. There's one older school album in this mix, but most of the other ones are from the 90s forward. So let's get into it. I'll move over a little bit and show the album covers, and we'll get to number 15 on my list. All right, at number 15, I've got Wobbler and their album From Silence to Somewhere. This is from 2017, Symphonic Prog from Norway. It's number 30 on the top 100 list for Prog Archives. Also on the top 100 list is Dwellers of the Deep, their follow-up from 2020, which is number 69 on their list. And Wobbler are one of the best examples of modern progressive rock and what you can expect, especially this Norwegian scene. I think Norway is really taking the torch for great modern symphonic progressive rock that has a lot of love for the classics in the genre. You hear bits of Yes, you hear bits of Gentle Giant and Genesis and all these classics, but they infuse their own flavor. You know, they utilize sounds from their homeland, sounds from their own modern day influences to create a great stew of modern progressive rock that really captivates and interests me. I just love the whole band approach to this record. Compositions that feel fresh and don't feel too dated, even though it's influenced by older styles of music. Obviously, they have like sections, as you might expect, medieval feel, psychedelic moments, folky moments, It's all here, and it just never lets up. Every song, there's just so much to it. There's so much going on in the musical palette, and they never give you much of a breather. It's just so much information being thrown at you, but it's so fun to listen to, and you uncover so much hidden gems as you continue to listen to the music. There's only 4 tracks on this record. The first is the 20-minute title track, From Silence to Somewhere, which is a great epic. Takes you through so many different sections as it goes through their kind of musical landscape. So many vintage classic instruments. That's something they're known for as well. The Lars Fredrik Frøsli has all these classic vintage keyboards that are present on the record. And I love the vocals. Andreas Pressmo is just a fantastic singer who kind of rises up to the level of a John Anderson, but definitely has his own style to it as well. And I love the 2 10-minute tracks that are on the second half of the record. Fermented Hours, which is just a frenetic, almost like akin to like Yes's Sound Chaser, with great organ work and folksy vocals. And Foxlight, which is just a gorgeous track. Opens acoustically with mellotron flutes and guitars and bass clarinet and glockenspiel, leading to a more bombastic, louder section with harpsichord, and has definite gentle giant undertones. So it's just a really great album to really appreciate if you want to know what modern prog is all about and the potential that modern prog artists have. To me, I've always thought of Wobbler as like putting Yes and Gentle Giant in a blender and add a bit of like a Norwegian folk kind of flair, almost like an Anglagard kind of feel, which we'll be getting to shortly. And you get an incredible band that deserve all the praise, and I believe this is the most recent album on the whole list from 2017, and to get that kind of universal acclaim from the prog community is really remarkable in today's day and age, where a lot of prog fans prefer to stay with the music of the 70s and hold that up in higher esteem. That this can break through and be number 30 on Prog Archives list is pretty remarkable. So an excellent record, and definitely one of my favorites, one of my personal favorites on the list for sure. And number 14, the only older school album, the only 70s album on today's list, is Vandergraph Generator's Godbluff from 1975. This is eclectic prog from the United Kingdom, obviously. And this is all the way up at number 11 on Prog Archives list, so they have it much higher on their list than I do. And there's a lot of albums in contention on the list from Vandergraph Generator. Upon Hearts from 1971 is number 12 on Prog Archives list, so those 2 albums are kind of neck and neck, this one and Pawn Hearts, and some people would probably argue that Pawn Hearts should be the entry on the list rather than Godbluff. Also on Prog Archives list, H to He, Who Am the Only One from 1970 is at number 36, and Still Life from 1976 is at number 50. So they have a very large presence on the Prog Archives, and for good reason. They're one of the classic prog bands, maybe not quite in like the top 5 or 6 when you're thinking of like the biggest impact bands in the scene, but they definitely be on the fringes, right just beyond that, I think, in terms of impact, in terms of universal acclaim from the prog community. But they're a little bit more of an acquired taste also. You know, they have a very unique style. I think Peter Hamill's vocals especially are very unique and very particular and somewhat of an acquired taste. And for me, they're a little bit difficult, honestly, to really come to appreciate, because he puts a lot of emotion, and it's kind of like emotion trumps melody in a lot of ways. I like more melodic vocals, more pretty, beautiful vocals, but that's not really what this is about. They have a harshness to them and an expressiveness to them, and some people love that and think he's one of the star vocalists in the whole prog community. And I really respect what he does. And even though sometimes it's not as melodically satisfying to me, I do really like how he's able to convey these really dark, expressive stories and lyrics. He's a storyteller at his heart, and I think that comes through in these pieces of music. And this is one of my favorite of the Vandergraph Generator records, honestly. It's fairly short and compact. Once again, there's only like 4 tracks here on this record, but each one unravels a very interesting musical palette with some darker tinges, some great saxophone and flute work, some mellotron, some organ, creating this really interesting style that's very unique to them. I think that's really why they stand on a bit of a pedestal to many in the prog community, is because they're extremely unique, doing their own thing, and nobody else really sounds like them. They definitely have their own niche in the prog community. And this is probably one of my favorites. Like I said, Pawn Hearts, for many, would probably be the signature album by the band, especially the big epic on it is definitely considered by many one of the premium prog rock epics of the 70s. But I do think this is a more focused record that just really packs a punch and doesn't have any fluff, and just every track really hits hard, and it showcases, I believe there was a bit of a hiatus between these two albums. Pawn Hearts came out in 1971, and this was their next album, which didn't come out till 75. And I think for a lot of people, it was exciting that the band still had it, that, they weren't going to just go away and never come back, or come back as a very different sounding band. They still had the same great qualities about them and were able to still impress their audience. So it's an incredible work of art, and I like it more the more I listen to it. It's definitely a grower of an album. You could say that about pretty much all of their albums, but I really respect what they're doing here and their kind of darker tinge sound and more storytelling aspects to their music that sets them apart from some of their other contemporaries from the scene at the time. So definitely deserving of this list, maybe a little bit low just because of my own personal preference and not finding them to be quite as enjoyable of a listen as some of the others in the genre, but I want to give them their flowers for really making an indelible stamp on the prog rock genre at large. And if you'd put this much higher, I totally get it, and it would be very deserving of a higher slot. But this is just my list, my preference, and I think this is a very adequate spot for this album at number 14. Next on my list at number 13, I have Dream Theater's Scenes from a Memory from 1999. And maybe this is a bit high. This is down to my personal preference and how important of an album this is to my growth as a prog fan. And I think it's indicative of a lot of newer quote-unquote prog fans who kind of came from metal, loved bands like Iron Maiden and Metallica and all that kind of stuff, and got pulled into prog through the metal genre, through discovering Dream Theater and Fate's Warning and Queensryche and those types of bands. And I think it's a very viable path into modern progressive rock, and definitely one I sympathize with. I wasn't a huge metal fan, so I won't say I came into prog that way, but I kind of got a classic foundation of progressive rock from my dad, and then went and discovered modern progressive rock in the early 2000s. And this was one of the preeminent classics that everyone was still buzzing about when I was getting into modern progressive rock, and I had to listen to it. And it really opened my eyes to loving the progressive metal genre. This is number 38 on the Prog Archives list. Also on Prog Archives list, not too far behind it, is Images and Words from 1992 at number 44, which some might consider that even more groundbreaking than this record. That's really, to me, kind of the classic blueprint of progressive metal as we know it. There was smatterings of earlier progressive metal before that in like the late 80s and such, but I think that's really when a prog band just emerged and were full on embracing the progressive elements in their progressive metal. So that to me is a landmark record and could be in this slot as well. But I think Scenes from Memory is a great choice also because it really sparked a new revolution in my eyes in the progressive metal genre. Being a more modern sounding record, being a big conceptual piece that a lot of bands have kind of taken that torch and ran with it. Bringing in Jordan Rudess, which adds another layer of virtuosity and razzle-dazzle to their sound, so to speak. And it just showcased a band doing exactly what they want to be doing without influence from the record labels and from the fans and all this kind of stuff. They had released Falling Into Infinity before this record and were disappointed in that process because they felt like the record label was kind of dictating what kind of music they had to come out with. So this was their break from the record label and just doing the music they wanted to do. And I believe this was even produced by the band itself, by Mike Portnoy and John Petrucci. And they crafted this really excellent concept record that's still fascinating to this day. This dark tinged story about a murder mystery and living out past lives and reincarnation and all these dark like story beats taking place within this work. But what really sets it apart to me is that the music is just so supremely fun to listen to. They really go all out with these virtuosic solos and different complex time signatures and these great instrumentals. And they just don't sacrifice anything. They just completely do what they want to do. And yeah, you could argue that maybe they veer on cheesiness at times. Maybe they're too show-offy and focus too much on playing their instruments fast and in weird time signatures rather than focusing on the composition itself. But I love it all the more for that, and I think it really caused the genre to go in a certain direction. You know, taking cues from this album, you'd get bands today like Haken and No Spoon, which is another recent band that are taking its cues from albums like this to explore stories, to be able to play what they want to play and not be afraid to show their virtuosity in their musicianship. And I really love this album. I think it's really cleverly constructed. I think it's a great story. And I love that the band is just doing what they love and no holds barred. And it produces a fantastically fun record to listen to that showcases a band at the peak of their powers, just crafting something really fun. And it brought me into the progressive metal world when I was kind of a metal snob. I didn't really care for metal music. And this opened my eyes that metal can be fun and it can be progressive. And I love Dream Theater and I've loved everything since. So I'm very grateful for this album and how it impacted my development in progressive music. Next, we move to Anglagard and their album Hybris from 1992. This is symphonic prog from Sweden. This makes number 29 on Prog Archives list. And I think this is a really inspiring album for a lot of Scandinavian bands to follow. I mean, I talked about Wobbler not too long ago, which I feel some of the influence from this record into Wobbler as well. And they also have another album on the Prog Archives list, Vilgens Oga from 2012. That's at number 83 on the list. They really only have 3 studio albums, I believe. This one, Epilogue, and then Vilgens Oga. So their catalog is pretty sparse, but every album they craft is just really expertly done. It's largely instrumental. There are some vocals on this record, but to me the vocals aren't really the standout part of the record. They're fine. They're not like terrible, but to me what really makes this album stand out is the musicianship and how they're able to, much like Wobbler, give homage to the classic bands of the 70s. There's some King Crimson's type spirit here, some Genesis and Yes definite flavors that you can feel in this mix. But they're bringing a modern edge to it. They're bringing the kind of newer production style, their own like Scandinavian folk history, and adding their own personality to it in a fascinating way that creates something new and fresh, even though it takes cues from the classic era of the genre. And I think it was a quite refreshing record. To me, this is an important record to have on the list because it really brought in this kind of third wave of progressive rock that is still being experienced today. You know, this is what allowed prog to become cool again in some ways, because after the 70s, prog struggled. You know, there was definitely this neo-prog scene throughout the 80s, spearheaded by bands like Marillion and Pendragon. But for a lot of people, it was kind of missing something. It was not quite as exciting and vibrant as the prog rock of the 70s used to be. And it was bringing in new wave elements and stuff from kind of this newer school of thought. But this was an album that just really celebrated its influences and was able to bring something new and fresh to the table that I think really excited a lot of people. The opening track, George Rock, is just a classic in the genre to me. It's a perfect opener, great blend of synth, organ solos, emotional guitar solos, mellotrons, and drums. There's this piano intro that really draws you in automatically. It sounds unique, and as soon as you hear it, you can identify this piece. And it just goes through so many different things as it goes through its runtime. There's so many different moods. There's some more pastoral sections throughout the record. There's moments of ferocity as the band members just really display some technical prowess. And it's just exciting and fun to listen to. Even to this day, it doesn't sound dated. It still sounds vibrant and fresh and fits right in the modern prog landscape, just like when it first came out. And this record came out in 1992, so that's like over 30 years later. That's pretty remarkable that an album that's over 30 years old still sounds so vibrant and fresh. And it's really exciting that these types of bands kept the genre alive, were able to revitalize it, and this led to like Flower Kings coming out and putting their stamp on modern progressive rock. All the Neil Morse era stuff, Spock's Beard, Echolin, these bands were able to really embrace progressive rock again. Not that it was like a hugely popular scene in the mainstream. Obviously, this is still a very niche genre, and a scene that only select people even understand or realize exists. But for those in the know, this is like a cult favorite album, and for good reason. Very universally beloved. Excellent playing, excellent blending of different styles, and it crafts a really entertaining listen that still holds up today and is very deserving of a placement on this list. And then we have number 11 on my list. This is Steven Wilson's The Raven That Refused to Sing and Other Stories from 2013. This is crossover prog from the United Kingdom. Number 35 on Prog Archives list. Steven Wilson's Hand Cannot Erase is also in the top 100 at number 52. That was his follow-up to this release. Also, a couple albums that he did with Porcupine Tree make the list. Fear of a Blank Planet is at number 54, and In Absentia is at number 68. All albums that I love dearly. If you watch my channel, you know I'm a huge fan of Steven Wilson, and I feel like he gets a lot of unnecessary hate, especially his latest albums, which delve more into kind of a more poppier direction. But a lot of love, I think, in the prog community for this record and for Hand Cannot Erase, which some people consider like modern masterpieces of prog rock. And I must agree that this is one of the best, maybe the best example of modern progressive rock. If you're uncertain about modern prog and what it even is, or if you're interested in anything that existed beyond the 70s, I think this is a great starting point to get you into the modern progressive scene, because like a lot of the albums I've been talking about today, it really pays homage to classic progressive rock in a lot of ways. Luminol comes onto the scene, sounds like, classic King Crimson, and, all of these different disparate elements, some saxophone work, flute work throughout the record. You get these really exciting virtuosic playouts. You get some pastoral, more acoustic moments like you might expect from Genesis in their prime. Some really great Chris Squire-esque bass work, especially in that opening of Luminol. You get a lot of great classic progressive rock flavors, but I don't think it's just derivative of the old school prog rock. I think Steven Wilson is able to add a freshness to this record, a fresh perspective. And one of the topics you have to think about when talking about modern progressive rock is, I think, why a lot of people dismiss it and don't care for it is because they feel like it's not really progressing the genre forward. I mean, progressive rock in the name, the whole point of progressive rock was to do something new and different and innovative, and to push rock music forward into new directions that it previously hadn't gone into. And so some people view the modern prog rock scene to kind of go against that style, to not be quite as innovative, to be looking backwards and just paying homage to artists that came before and not really innovating anything new within the genre. And I disagree with that sentiment. I think these artists are really bringing new flavors to the table. I think Steven Wilson infuses a lot of his own personality and his own musical framework into this record. Yeah, he's paying homage to his prog rock heroes, but he's also bringing in his own sense of musicality and melody. He's bringing this kind of dark, melancholy edge to the music. He's bringing this unique storytelling perspective as someone who has kind of a darker way of looking at the world and portraying these very dark, twisted stories. And the beauty of The Raven That Refused to Sing, the last track, the title track, is just heart-wrenchingly beautiful and sounds so unique to Steven Wilson and his worldview. I really find a lot to adore and love about this record. I think Steven Wilson is one of our most brilliant modern-day artists who doesn't ever stay stale, who always is innovating and doing something interesting and unique within the genre. And the way he brought together these all-star players on this record to realize this really complex, intricate playing and musical arrangement is really remarkable. We have Guthrie Govan on this record, Adam Holzman, Theo Travis, Nick Beggs, Marco Miniman, just these all-star people who are able to pull off this incredible feat of impressing you with great, intricate, complicated compositions, but there's also some really great writing at the table here. At the core of it, these songs are just beautifully written and realized by Steven Wilson and his aesthetic, the way he views the world and the way he writes music. And I just really respect him as an excellent songwriter, and that he was able to step out and do something a bit more adventurous with this record, bringing a bit of a jazzier touch to some of the tracks here. And it's just an incredible record that I absolutely adore and think is a shining beacon within the progressive rock scene. I think Hand Cannot Erase, that came after it, is just as good and showcases a lot of similar things, but in a more conceptual, modern format compared to this one, which is a bit more of a throwback, but I think it works well with these stories that are being told, which feel more almost akin to like classic fairy tales and things, and how they're portrayed here, which I think works in tandem with utilizing classic progressive rock as the foundation for this music to build upon, and Wilson's able to infuse his own style to make it unique and sound like nothing that has come before it. So, excellent record, one of my favorites of all time, and just barely missed the top 10. I probably would have kicked it into the top 10 if it was just my preference, but I feel like I gotta give some weight to some more classics that really set the scene in the genre in the 70s, and that's what we'll be getting into in the next episode. Alright, so that's what I have for you today. 5 excellent records that I strongly recommend you check out if you haven't heard any of these. They're all top tier, 5-star records that deserve to be heard. Hopefully you have a bit of an open mind to more modern progressive rock and what it can be doing. Sure, it pays homage and leans on its history when it looks backward at great progressive rock, but I think they add enough of their own personality, their own perspective, modern production techniques, to bring something new to the table that is really great for people looking for newer music in this style, which is something I'm always fascinated with and looking at myself. So thank you guys for joining me. I'll be doing another one in a week's time, next Sunday. We'll get into numbers 10 through 6. So thank you guys. Hopefully you're enjoying this series. Let me know any feedback you have in the comments, and I'll hopefully catch you guys in a future episode. Bye everybody. Enjoy the music.